Wyoming Territory, 1879. The wind bit sharp and dry across the high plains, and Naomi Sutton's hands trembled as she gripped the reins of the bay mare she had stolen from her husband. The horse was lathered, lungs heaving, but Naomi did not stop. She had been riding since midnight. She did not look back. Behind her was the cabin near Snake River, the place where Sutton had made her small over the years with fists, with words, with silence that chilled worse than any Wyoming winter. She had married him at 16. Now, at 23, she was finally gone. Her lip still bled from where he'd struck her the night before. Her ribs ached. But her heart was alive for the first time in years. The sun was climbing when she reached the edge of Sweetwater Valley. Dust clung to her skirts. Her boots were cracked. She had no money, no food, no real plan, but she had her life. That was something. She rode until she saw a ranch tucked low into the hill's white fence posts, a barn with a crooked weather vane and cattle dotting the far fields. It was the only sign of people for miles. Naomi hesitated, then nudged the mare forward. A man stepped out from the barn as she approached, tall and lean, with a scar under one eye and a rifle slung across his back. His shirt was dusty, sleeves rolled, and he shaded his eyes with one hand. "You lost," he called. Naomi's voice cracked. I need water for the horse." The man studied her for a beat, then nodded. "Bring her around, trough's out back." She dismounted stiffly, legs barely holding her. The man walked over and took the reins gently. His eyes flicked to her swollen lip, the bruises blooming on her arms. He said nothing, but his jaw tightened. "I am not lost," she said, voice steadier now. "I left someone, I am not going back." The man gave a slow nod. "Name's Vaughn Sutter." "This is my place. Naomi Sutton." She paused, then added, "That is not my name anymore." Vaughn's eyes stayed steady on hers. "All right, Naomi, you hungry?" She nodded, throat tight. He led her to the porch. She climbed the steps, heart hammering. He opened the door and let her inside. The kitchen was plain but warm. The smell of coffee and bacon lingered. Vaughn poured her water, then handed her a plate of cornbread and beans. She sat, hands shaking, and ate while he leaned against the counter, arms folded. He said nothing while she ate. He waited. When she finished, she wiped her hands and looked up. "I have no money. I can work. I can cook so clean. Whatever you need." Vaughn's voice was quiet. "You do not have to earn your place at my table." Naomi blinked, unsure what to do with that kindness. "I will not stay long," she said. "Just long enough to figure out where to go next." Vaughn nodded. "You can take the time you need. No one's looking for you here." Naomi stared down at her hands. "He will come." Vaughn's voice was firmer now. "Then he will be sorry." She looked up, startled. He met her gaze, calm and certain. That was the first moment she felt a flicker of safety, not because Vaughn promised her freedom, but because he believed she deserved it. The next 2 days passed slow and quiet. Naomi slept in the small room off the kitchen. Vaughn gave her space. He rose early, tended the cattle, fixed a fence that had been down by wind. Naomi watched him through the window, the way he moved steady, unhurried. A man not ruled by anger. She found herself breathing easier. She helped where she could, chopping vegetables, feeding the hens. She sewed a torn shirt of his with careful hands. He thanked her with a small nod, nothing more, but it mattered. On the third morning, she found Vaughn on the porch sipping coffee, watching dawn break over the pastures. She stepped outside, arms wrapped around herself. "You sleep all right?" he asked. "I dreamed of running," she said, "but I was not afraid." He looked at her. "That is a good dream." She nodded, then sat beside him. They watched the sun rise in silence. That night a storm rolled in. Naomi woke to thunder and the howl of wind. She padded barefoot through the house, heart racing. Storms had always meant worse things when Ali was near. She found Vaughn in the front room, stoking the fire. He looked up. "You all right?" "I do not like storms," she said. He nodded, then motioned to the chair near his. "You can sit here." "Safe place?" She hesitated, then sat. The fire crackled. Rain beat against the windows. She looked over at him. "Why do you live way out here alone?" Vaughn stirred the fire with the poker. "Too many years in the army. After that, I wanted quiet." He glanced at her. I wanted to be someone else, she said softly. I thought marriage would change things. It was just a different kind of cage, he nodded. I knew men like him in the war thought they were made for control. Her voice was tight. He made me think I was weak. You are not, she looked at him. How do you know? Because you left, he said simply. That takes more strength than staying. Her throat burned. She turned her eyes to the fire. Vaughn stood, then disappeared into the back room. He returned with a quilt thick, worn soft, and draped it over her shoulders without a word. She looked up at him and whispered, "Thank you." He gave her a small nod. "You are safe here, Naomi." And for the first time in years, she believed it. The next morning, she helped him hitch the cart. He was going into town for supplies. She hesitated, then asked, "Can I come?" He looked at her. "You sure?" She nodded. "I need to stop hiding." He helped her into the cart and they rode the 10 miles into Rawlins. The town was dusty, quiet. A few glances lingered on her bruises, but no one spoke. Vaughn stayed close, not possessive, just present. At the general store, she picked up thread, matches, a tin of coffee. He paid without question. On the way out, a man in a dark coat crossed their path. Naomi froze. It was not Ali, but he looked enough like him that her knees buckled. Vaughn was there in an instant, steady hand at her back, voice low. "He is not here, you are all right." She looked up at him, eyes wide. He held her gaze. "You are not alone." Later, back at the ranch, she sat on the porch steps while he unloaded supplies. The sun was setting. "The air smelled like sage and dust," she said quietly. "You make me feel like I can breathe again." Vaughn looked at her. "You deserve to." She watched him, heart thudding. Maybe this place was not just a stopover, maybe it was a beginning. And maybe this cowboy, quiet, steady kind, was not just safety, maybe he was peace. The wind had changed by early April, and with it came the thaw. Snowmelt crept into the gullies and low washes, and the grass, brittle and yellow for months, began to green at the roots. Naomi watched the land shift from winter's hold to spring's promise while mending a saddle blanket on the porch. The fabric was worn smooth in places, the thread fraying along the edges. She worked slow, her needle steady. Vaughn was oiling the hinges on the barn doors, crouched low in the dirt, sleeves rolled back to the elbow. He didn't speak unless it was worth saying, something Naomi had come to feel as a kind of mercy. She could sit near him and not be expected to fill the air. "I used to think spring was the cruelest time," she said, not lifting her eyes from the stitching. Vaughn looked up, wiping his hands on a rag. "Why's that?" "It tricks you. Makes you think things are going to soften, but nothing did, not back then." Her voice caught, then steadied. "Now it feels different." He nodded once, rose to his feet. "The land doesn't lie, it just doesn't rush." Naomi let the needle pause. "I didn't know how much I wanted quiet until I had it." Vaughn leaned his shoulder against the post beside her. "Most folks don't." "Not until they've been through enough noise." She glanced up at him. "Did you have someone once?" He didn't look away. "A long time ago, before the war, she married someone else while I was gone." "I don't blame her." Naomi studied his face, the way the scar along his cheekbone pulled faintly when he was thinking. "You ever wish things had gone different?" "I used to," he said. "Not so much anymore. I like what I've got." She didn't ask what that meant, but her heart answered anyway. That afternoon, she started tending the garden plot beside the house. The ground was stubborn, still half frozen in places, but she worked it with her hands, turning the soil, mixing in ash from the hearth. Vaughn let her be, only bringing her a pail of water when the sun began to dip behind the ridge. "Rose'll run better if you angle them toward the slope," he said, setting the bucket down. "I was wondering that," she said. "Didn't want to ask too soon." "You can ask anything," he said quietly. She met his eyes, and for a moment, the air held still between them. That night she sat at the table while he read from an old almanac. His voice was low, steady, the words slow as molasses, but she didn't mind. It calmed her, hearing him speak without demand or edge. His presence filled the house in a way that didn't crowd, just made it feel lived in. "You ever miss town?" she asked. "Only when I need salt or nails," he said with a faint smile. "I think I'd miss people," she said. He closed the book. "You don't seem lonesome." I'm not, she said, then added, not anymore. Outside, coyotes called in the distance. Vaughn stood and lit the lantern, adjusting the flame until it held steady. She watched the way his hand moved, careful and practiced. You want to ride out tomorrow? He asked. Check the north fence line, she hesitated. You sure? You'll need to see more of the land if you're gonna stay. She looked down at her hands, then back at him. I haven't said I was staying. He didn't argue. Just nodded once and said, saddle up after breakfast. They rode out early, the sun just beginning to rise. Naomi rode his gray gelding, a steady mount with a calm gait. Vaughn didn't speak much, just pointed out features of the land: a dry creek that ran hard in spring, a stand of cottonwoods where elk sometimes bedded down. She memorized every word. They reached the north fence by mid-morning. A section had collapsed under the weight of snow. Vaughn dismounted and began pulling the rails into place. Naomi stepped in without being asked, holding the posts while he hammered the nails home. You're not afraid of work, he said. I was raised on it, she answered. He just never let me do anything that mattered. You matter now, he said, not looking at her, her breath caught. She didn't answer, didn't need to. They ate lunch beneath a cedar, sharing a can of beans and a heel of bread. Vaughn handed her the last bite without a word. She took it, and for the first time in years, the act of accepting something didn't feel like a debt. On the ride back, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine sap and thawing earth. Naomi let the gelding find his own pace, her body swaying easy in the saddle. You think the land ever forgets what it's been through? She asked. Vaughn looked over at her. No, it just grows around the scar, she nodded, her hand brushing the gelding's neck. I'd like to do the same. You will, he said. In your own time. When they reached the ranch, she didn't dismount right away. She sat there looking at the house, the barn, the yard she'd weeded that morning. I've never belonged anywhere, she said. You do here, Vaughn told her. She nodded, slow and sure. And for the first time, she believed it. Naomi stood in the lean shade of the cottonwoods behind the barn, her skirts brushing the new shoots of grass. She held a spade in one hand and a burlap sack of onion sets in the other. The air was thick with the scent of warming earth. Vaughn had mentioned the ground would be ready soon, but she hadn't asked. She'd just waited, watched how the land softened, learned its rhythm. She crouched and began placing the sets, one by one, the soil cool beneath her fingers. Behind her, boots crunched over dry twigs. You're planting early, Vaughn said. They'll take, she replied. I can feel it. He stood beside her for a moment, watching, then he crouched and picked up a handful of dirt, crumbling it between his fingers. You've got the eyes for land, he said. Not many do, she looked at him. You think I could make something grow here? I think you already have, he said. Then he stood, brushing his hands on his trousers. I need to ride out to the canyon edge. Something spooked the cattle last night. Naomi straightened. I'll come, he hesitated. It's rough country out that way. I've walked worse, she said. They rode out before noon, the sun sharp overhead. The trail narrowed as they climbed, the sagebrush thinning into rocky outcrops. Naomi's horse picked its way carefully, hooves clicking against stone. Vaughn led the way, rifle tied across his saddle. At the ridge, they dismounted. Far below, the land dropped into a gulch of twisted pines and dark stone. A steer lay broken at the bottom, its body still. Cougar, maybe, Vaughn said, eyeing the drag marks in the dust. Naomi crouched to study the tracks. Not a bear, no claw scuffs, and too clean. Cat did it. She looked up at the sky. You want to track it, he shook his head. Not today. If it comes back, we'll know. They stayed there a while longer, the wind tugging at their clothes. Vaughn rested his hand on the saddle horn, his gaze distant. You ever think about leaving this place? She asked. No, he said. I left enough behind already. This land knows me. Naomi touched the rough leather reins. I don't know what I'm meant for yet. You don't have to know, he said. You just have to keep choosing. They rode back slow. A kestrel hovered overhead, wings steady against the sky. Naomi watched it, silent. Her thoughts moved like river water, still at the surface, but deep underneath. That evening, she carried the wash basin out to the porch and set it on the bench. Water sloshed against the sides as she wrung out a towel. The day's dust clung to her arms and neck. Vaughn stepped out a moment later, rolling his sleeves down. "You always wash out here?" she asked. "House gets too hot when the stove's been going," he said. "Besides, I like the air." She passed him the basin. "You first." He dipped his hands, the water turning pale brown. She watched the lines of his face shift as he scrubbed his forearms. His wrist bore a faint mark, an old burn, maybe. She didn't ask. When he handed the basin back, their fingers brushed. It was nothing more than a moment, but her breath caught all the same. Later, she took the long path through the pasture as dusk settled. The sky had turned to slate, and the first stars blinked above the hills. Vaughn was leaning against the fence, boots planted firm. She joined him, resting her hands on the top rail. "You've got a way of going quiet," he said. "I'm not used to having space to think," she said. "Some days my mind still waits for noise that never comes." Vaughn looked out across the pasture. "We don't get to choose what we carry, just where we set it down." She turned to him. "Where did you learn to talk like that?" He gave a faint shrug. "Spent years not saying much." "When I did speak, I wanted it to count." Naomi nodded. "It does." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of wood smoke from the chimney. Vaughn's shoulder brushed hers just barely. She didn't move away. "You plan on staying through summer?" he asked. "I hadn't thought that far." "You should," he said. "Lot of life between now and then." She looked at him, her voice quiet. "Would you want that?" Vaughn met her gaze fully, his expression unreadable but not distant. "If you're asking whether I want you to stay, the answer's yes." She didn't answer right away. Her hand found the fence rail again, fingers curling against the grain. "I've never been wanted without being needed," she said. "This ain't about need," Vaughn said. "I want you here because the place is better with you in it." Naomi closed her eyes for a breath, then opened them. "I'd like to stay, not just for the spring." Vaughn nodded once. "Then we'll make room for that." And they stood there, side by side, as the last of the light faded and the stars deepened overhead, two people who had learned, in their own time, how to rest without fear. Naomi leaned over the basin in the barn's tack room, wringing out a rag as she watched dust swirl in the late afternoon light. The horses had been restless all day, ears twitching at things unseen, and Vaughn had ridden out toward the west ridge after a neighbor stopped by with word of a busted fence near the boundary line. She hadn't asked questions. He'd saddled up with quiet efficiency and a coil of rope, and she'd handed him the tin of biscuits she'd baked that morning without a word. Now, with the sun dropping low and shadows stretching across the yard, the quiet pressed differently. Not the kind that soothed. The kind that listened too close. She stepped out into the yard, wiping her hands on her apron, and spotted a figure approaching from the main road, dust at his boots, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. He walked like a man who expected to be obeyed. Naomi's stomach turned to stone. She didn't move, didn't speak, not until he came close enough for her to see the scar above his collarbone and the shape of his knuckles. Too familiar, Illy, his mouth curled when he saw her. "Thought maybe you'd gotten yourself eaten by coyotes," he said, voice thick with disdain. Naomi didn't flinch. "You need to leave." He stepped closer. "You think hiding behind another man makes you brave? I'm not hiding," she said, pulse pounding, "and I'm not yours." Illy's gaze swept the yard, then landed on the barn behind her. "This his place?" Naomi didn't answer. Illy's eyes narrowed. "You think men like him are soft just because they don't raise their voice?" She took a step forward. "I'm not afraid of you." His hand twitched at his side, and something in her stance shifted, shoulders back, feet firm. The creak of saddle leather cut through the air. Vaughn came into view atop the ridge, rifle across his lap, face unreadable. He rode down slow, steady, the kind of calm that didn't bluff. Illy turned, watching him approach. "This him?" he asked again. Naomi didn't respond. She didn't need to. Vaughn dismounted with practiced ease, tied the reins to a hitch, then walked toward them. He didn't look at Naomi. His eyes were on Illy alone. "You're trespassing," Vaughn said. Illy gave a tight smile. "That's so. Seems like I've got a right to speak to my wife." Naomi stepped between them. Not anymore, Vaughn's voice didn't rise. You've said your piece, now you'll be moving along. Ellie's jaw clenched. You think you've won something here, that she won't come crawling back when your good manners run dry? Naomi turned her head, met Vaughn's eyes. He doesn't get to speak for me. Vaughn nodded once, then he looked back to Ellie. If you set foot here again, you'll meet the business end of this rifle. Ellie spat in the dirt. You think I'm scared of a rancher with a soft voice? Vaughn didn't blink. No. I think you're stupid enough not to know when you're beaten. Ellie stared at him for a long moment, then sneered. She ain't worth the trouble. Naomi didn't move as he walked past. She waited until he was dust on the horizon before she exhaled. Vaughn didn't speak. He just stepped to her side and stood there, breathing with her until her hands stopped shaking. Later inside, she sat at the table with a cup of cooled coffee between her palms. Vaughn leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, not pushing, not pulling. He used to say I'd never make it a day without him, she said. That no one else would want the kind of broken I was. I'm not here because you're broken, Vaughn said. I'm here because you're true. She looked up. You saw that in me when I couldn't. He stepped forward slow. I saw a woman who didn't ask to be saved, just one who deserved to be safe. Naomi stood, the distance between them closing like breath in the cold. You've never asked me for anything. I'll ask now, he said. Stay. Her eyes filled, but she didn't look away. I want to. Not because I'm running, because this is where I want to build. Vaughn reached out and she let his hand settle gently at her waist. Then we'll build, he said. Whatever you want. However long it takes. She pressed her forehead to his chest and he held her like she might break and like he knew she wouldn't. The wind outside had quieted. The house felt full in a way it never had before. Naomi closed her eyes, breathed deep, and let herself believe in peace that stayed. Naomi folded the last of the linens and placed them neatly in the trunk near the window, the scent of sun-dried cotton lingering on her fingertips. The spring rains had come early, coaxing the meadow into bloom. She could hear the hens clucking contentedly in the yard, the steady rhythm of Vaughn's hammer tapping in the distance as he added a new lean-to along the barn's north side. She stood and pressed her palm to the sill. The ranch had changed in small, quiet ways in the past weeks: a new clothesline, a patched roof, a second saddle hanging beside Vaughn's in the tack room. She had not asked for these things. They had simply grown out of the life they were building. Later, she brought him a jar of cold water and leaned against the fence while he wiped his brow with the edge of his shirt sleeve. I've been thinking about putting in a root cellar, he said, glancing toward the slope behind the house. Wouldn't take but a few days if the soil's firm enough. Naomi watched the wind move through the high grass. I've never had to think more than a season ahead, not really. He took a long drink, then passed the jar back. You've got that freedom now. She was quiet a moment. I don't want to waste it. You're not, he said. You're using it. She gave a faint nod, then looked down at the dirt under her nails. I've been wondering something. Say it. If I asked you to build something with me, not just a house or a garden, but a life, what would you say? He set the hammer down. I'd say I already am. Naomi felt something shift inside her, not sudden, but like a door opening where there had only been a wall. That evening they sat on the porch steps with their boots resting in the dust, knees nearly touching. The stars were just beginning to show. Vaughn held a small parcel wrapped in oilcloth, and when he placed it in her hands, she looked at him, puzzled. Go on, he said. She unfolded the cloth to find a pair of silver hairpins, modest but finely made, shaped like leaves. She turned them over in her hands, thumb tracing the edges. These were your mother's, she said softly. She wore them every Sunday, he said. Kept them wrapped in that same cloth after she passed. Naomi looked up. You're giving them to me. I'm asking you to wear them, he said, when we stand together before the preacher in town. Her breath caught and he reached for her hand, his fingers warm against her wrist. I want a life with you, Naomi, not just days passing under the same roof. I want to build something that lasts. She closed her hand around the pins, then laid her head on his shoulder. Then let's stand before him. The next morning, she wore her hair pinned up for the first time in years. They hitched the wagon and rode into Rawlins, the wind carrying the promise of summer through the open hills. There was no fanfare, no guests, just the town's preacher, a quiet corner of the church, and two people who had found their way through loss and silence and long road. Vaughn spoke his vows with a steady voice, his hand wrapped around hers like the first time he'd guided her down from the saddle. Naomi answered with eyes clear and dry. She had nothing to run from anymore, only something to walk toward. They returned home before sundown. That night, Naomi stood by the stove, spooning stew into 2 bowls while Vaughn lit the lantern. The house felt fuller than it ever had. She set the bowls on the table, then reached across and took his hand. "We should build that root cellar," she said. "We will. And a smokehouse before fall. We'll need it," she smiled. "We're going to need more hands eventually." Vaughn looked across the table at her. "You thinking what I'm thinking? I'm thinking of a boy with your eyes and a girl with my quiet," she said. He reached for her, drew her in close. "Then let's raise them right, here, together." The rest of the evening passed in low voices and laughter, the kind that came easy when all the doors were unlocked. Outside, the horses shifted in their stalls. The wind moved gently through the grass. And inside, 2 people lay beneath one roof, no longer waiting to be whole. Years passed as they do. The ranch held steady, just as the land had. Naomi's garden grew in thick rows, and the house filled with the sound of small feet and bedtime stories told in low, patient voices. Vaughn built a cradle with his own hands, carving the edge with wildflowers to match the ones Naomi had once planted beneath the kitchen window. They grew older, but not apart. And each winter, when the snow drifted high and the windows fogged with frost, Naomi would sit by the fire with silver pins still in her hair, and Vaughn would rest beside her, hand folded around hers, the silence between them warm and alive. They had not outrun the past. They had simply outlived it, together.